So when I listen to people like Senator Tommy Tuberville talk about, getting rid of all Muslims in this country, as an African American, I then say, what about white Christians? Because when we look at violence in this country, mass shootings in this country, who typically commits them? That's not true.
Well, that is true.
Okay, if what you just described is the case, then the Italians, the Jewish, the Polish, every group that came to the United States did exactly what you just said. They had own communities, own culture. So, do you understand the history of America?
Whenever Roland Martin enters a debate, the energy changes. He doesn't simply respond, he dissects the argument. On Piers Morgan Uncensored, Jillian Michaels attempted to frame the discussion around Muslim extremism. But once Roland introduced historical context, evidence, and a broader moral perspective, her argument began to unravel. Rather than accepting fear-driven talking points, Roland reframed the entire debate. He forced the conversation away from generalizations and toward consistency, accountability, and equal standards. What makes this exchange powerful isn't simply who wins. It's how Roland changes the direction of the discussion in real time.
Piers,
you don't have an answer, do you?
Piers, Jillian, I've had to sit here and listen to y'all go back and forth. Can I please make this point?
Please.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
Piers. Yes. Last week I was in Montgomery, Alabama for the 7th anniversary of the Montgomery bus boycott. And there is a National Memorial for Peace and Justice and Legacy Museum there that documents, that commemorates the documented 4,400 lynchings in this country. And there were more that took place. As an African American, when I understand what it means when you have a people who have a bullseye on their back, who are being targeted. I understand that. And so it is absolutely shameful that you cannot be at a Hanukkah celebration and it gets interrupted by mass violence because of two evil individuals. But I'm saying two evil individuals for a reason. Because under the legitimate FBI leadership of Christopher Wray, they said that the greatest threat in America is white domestic terrorism. So when I listen to people like Senator Tommy Tuberville talk about, getting rid of all Muslims in this country, as an African American, I then say, what about white Christians? Because when we look at violence in this country, mass shootings in this country, who typically commits them? And so I think anybody has to be very careful to not go down this path of, oh my God, all of them, when I, as an African American, who's also, Jillian, please allow me to finish. When I, as an African American, who's also a Christian, can literally look at the history of white Christians committing violence. And so what we cannot do is say, oh, it is the religion that's driving it, as opposed to it is these evil individuals. Piers, you properly talked about guns and how Australia, after that mass shooting, you said in the 90s, how they targeted. But the fact that they were successful should be a lesson to America. How about you also try that to deal with mass shootings in this country? And so it is wrong for us to go down this path of condemning an entire religion, condemning an entire group of people, whether they are Muslim, whether they are Jewish, whether they are Christian. What we have to recognize is there are evil people in this world, and our job is to root out evil and then how they impact people. But it's crazy to attack an entire religion and target all of those people.
I agree with that. My question, Wajahat, for you is what does the Muslim community do to root out these extremists in their midst?
Right.
Well, okay, I'm going to
not an understanding.
No.
By the way, everything you said, any white person who's committed such an atrocity should obviously go to jail for the rest of their life.
What has Jillian done to root out white mass shooters in America? Jillian, what have you done to root out and de-radicalize the white men in your community who are responsible for the #1 mass shooting in this country?
I would condemn and call it out, and I would, if I was on a jury, I would absolutely
what have you done?
vote for them
What have you done?
to go to prison. I'm also not doing anything to go after radical Muslims. I'm trying to condemn all violence and form some common ground with you here, where radicalism across the board should be condemned. But I think what you're not understanding is when people are concerned, they're concerned, as far as I can tell, about assimilation. And in all the conversations that I have had about this, they are worried, like, hey, if it's 2 radical Muslims and 1 good guy, how are we going to keep the 2 radicals out? And if you've got, let's say, 1% of 2 billion people that want to bring down the West, like, what do you do about chance of death to America and Dearborn? This is what I'm saying. Like, what do you say about that?
I keep hearing assimilation. I keep hearing assimilation. And again, this is the point which they're making. You keep saying assimilation, that is the answer. Again, what happens when people who are born here, who were brought here in chains, and their ancestors and their folks are here, and you still are dealing with white domestic terrorism? Is that assimilation? See, this is the problem. Y'all somehow think that assimilation, that's going to be the answer. That's not. It is not the answer.
Well,
and so it's nonsensical to think so.
Well, depends what you mean. I mean, look,
generally thrive in America.
Yeah, let them define assimilation.
Let me bring in Cenk here.
I'll define it.
Let me bring in Cenk.
I'll define it. It's not chanting death to America.
Please.
It's loving America. Wanting to pursue the American
also not
dream.
participating in a violent insurrection.
That's kind of the answer, in my opinion.
Can I say something, please, to Cenk? So, Cenk, this word assimilation, what it really means to me, at its purest, is that if you come to, say, the United States or the UK or Australia from another country, particularly another country which has a very different culture. So say you come from the Middle East and you come to live in America, live in London, live in Sydney, whatever. The word assimilate means that you do your best to be part of the new culture you're joining. What you don't do is put a drawbridge up and start your own culture within the culture of the country you go to at the expense of that nation's culture. I mean, at its purest...
That's not true!
Well, that is true.
Okay, if what you just described is the case, then the Italians, the Jewish, the Polish, every group that came to the United States did exactly what you just said. They had own communities, own culture. So, do you understand the history of America?
Yes, and I also understand that in the
and what you described.
Well, I don't remember the Italians in America setting up their own rival court system, for example, unless I missed it.
Muslims haven't either.
Because in the UK, we now have nearly 100 Sharia courts have been set up. Okay, so I don't remember that happening with any of the Poles or the Italians in the United States. That's what I'm talking about, Cenk.
Okay. All right. So what I can't stand is the double standard. So if, for example, Jillian said, what if 10% Muslims are violent? Okay. If you said that about Jewish people and you said, look, I'm not worried about most Jews, but, if 10% of Jews are treacherous and serve Israel first and betray their country. Hold on. No, Jillian. Now you let me talk. Okay. No, you let me talk. No. Okay. So now, if you said 10% of Jews are the real problem, everyone would be outraged, and rightfully so. That's not the right thing to say. But people say it blithely about Muslims, like we don't count, and it's no big deal to discriminate against us. Now let's talk about immigration. You fill out forms. If some idiot fills out a form and says, I'm for ISIS, I'm for Muslim extremism, and you don't want to let him into the country, of course you don't let him into the country. But now we're talking about Muslims at large. Wait, that's a totally different thing. By the way, are we doing the same thing for Israelis? Are we having them fill it? Hold on. Are we asking them to fill out a form? Are you against murdering 20,000 Palestinian kids? And if they say, no, I am for it, and I like what Israel did, are we banning them because they're sick, violent extremists who don't mind the murder of 20,000 children? No, of course not. In fact, when you look at the forms right now, what we're asking in entering our country is, what are your views about Israel? Who gives a damn what their views about Israel are when they're coming to America? Why are we asking about a different country? What I care most about is American sovereignty. Now, Roland is right. Muslims come here, Jews come here, Italians, etc. We all assimilate to some degree. I love the Pittsburgh Steelers. My favorite food is subs, etc. And I'm sure that's true of Jews, Christians, everyone, right? But we also keep a part of our culture. And if we said to, again, Jewish people, like we're saying to Muslims, how dare you not assimilate? What's with the silly hat and the stupid little things and the things coming out of your pockets? Why don't you assimilate? The real problem is the Jews. And they're too, hold on. And they're too loyal to Israel. And that's the real problem. They will not assimilate. All they care about is Israel. Everyone would say you're an unacceptable anti-Semite and you should be canceled forever.
Listen,
I've got to.
There's something compelling about watching Roland Martin dismantle Jillian Michaels' argument on Piers Morgan, uncensored not through theatrics, but with facts, history, and consistency. Jillian frames the discussion around radical Islam and presents Muslims as a uniquely dangerous threat. Roland refuses to accept that premise. Instead, he points to America's own history of collective blame and racial violence, including thousands of documented lynchings. His argument is simple. No entire religion or community should be judged by its worst members. Roland then exposes the double standard. Politicians have called for banning Muslims after acts of terrorism, yet no one suggests collectively blaming white Christians when white extremists commit mass violence. If public safety is truly the concern, the same standards should apply to everyone. As an African-American Christian, Roland acknowledges violence committed by people who shared his religion without blaming Christianity itself. That gives his argument moral consistency. Condemn the perpetrators, not millions of innocent people who share their identity. He also challenges the focus on Muslim extremism by pointing to domestic terrorism and gun violence. If reducing deaths is the real priority, then policies supported by evidence should matter more than politically convenient fears. When Piers questions whether Muslim immigrants assimilate, Roland reminds him that Italians, Jews, Irish Catholics, and Polish Americans also formed close cultural communities after arriving in the United States. Preserving traditions is not a rejection of assimilation. It is part of the American immigrant experience. Throughout the exchange, Jillian repeatedly tries to return to her original framing, but she never resolves Roland's central contradiction. Why should Muslims face collective suspicion when other groups are judged by the violence of individuals? By the end, Roland has transformed the debate. What began as a discussion about Muslim extremism becomes a broader question about fairness, equal standards, and collective blame. He doesn't merely challenge Jillian's conclusion. He exposes the fear-based framework behind it and replaces generalizations with evidence, history, and moral consistency.